Gentlemen, and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. You join us just as the Westminster goes to vote on the bill to prevent a no-deal Brexit. This is the second reading of the bill, and it's now in the committee stage. We're voting on the committee stage now. It's been quite a busy day in Westminster. They are now trying to clear this entire bill in one day. We'll just go back here to this vote
for
here.
the ayes, Mark Gardner and George Hollenbrae. For the noes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith.
Okay, so that's just, these I believe are just the amendments to the bill. There are several, and unfortunately, just as we were preparing to come on air, we didn't catch exactly which ones have been selected. So this voting process, as you know, takes a very long time in Westminster. We will try and update you through the show on what's happening. But basically what's happened today is that after last night's vote, there's a cross-party group of backbench MPs who've taken control of the Commons order paper for today, and they're trying to get this bill passed into today, going through all the stages of legislation, all the stages of debate, to seek an extension to our departure date until at least the 31st of January. John Bercow, as we know, allowed the motion. It was led by the Tory MP Oliver Letwin, and it passed by 328 votes to 301. That was last night. Today, the second stage, which they voted on at about 5 o'clock today, passed by 329 votes to 300. So it does seem like this bill will pass, but the government has already indicated that they may try to filibuster it in the Lords, and Boris Johnson has even said that he wouldn't necessarily obey the law. After this debate tonight, probably once all of these votes are finished, we should then move into a debate led by Boris Johnson on bringing a general election, which is a very complicated process as well. In order to get past the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act, he needs 2/3 of Parliament to vote for an election. But Labour have said today that they wouldn't back a general election because they believe that would be playing into Boris Johnson's hands. They believe that he and Dominic Cumming have planned this so that either an election can take them so close to the 31st of October that nothing can get done during that period, or that potentially they come back with a Tory majority, and we will then see they would overturn the legislation that is presumably going to be passed this evening and move straight towards a no deal. So the whole thing, as has been the case with virtually everything to do with Brexit for the last 6 months, if not the whole of the last 3 years, has been just chaotic. There was talk of a no confidence vote, but Jo Swinson, the leader of the Lib Dems, has said that she wouldn't tolerate Jeremy Corbyn-led government, even if it was temporary and just for the purposes of dealing with Brexit. So it seems difficult at this stage to even pass a no confidence bill, even though the government last night ejected 20 members of the Tory party from the Tory party as a result of their voting to pass to take control of the order paper today. That include names like Oliver Letwin, Rory Stewart, who was a member of the cabinet and a contender for the leadership just a few weeks ago, and Ken Clarke, who is I think one of the maybe the longest serving MP in the House, and a staunch Tory, albeit a confirmed Europhile, and one of the few really vocal Europhiles in the Tory party. So the whole process has been fairly remarkable. We also today had Prime Minister's questions. Boris Johnson, during that, swore on the floor of the House. No Prime Minister has ever done before. He also called Jeremy Corbyn a chlorinated chicken and a great big girl's blouse. I don't think I probably need to tell voters, viewers of this show, that we're not great fans of Boris Johnson here, and we're not exactly surprised that he should use language that rather demeans himself, the office, and Parliament as a whole. In other Brexit news, the Court of Session today in Edinburgh ruled that it couldn't prevent Boris Johnson from proroguing Parliament, as has been the plan since at least the middle of August, despite Boris Johnson claiming otherwise. The Court of Session today, Lord Doherty, the judge who heard the case, said the decision could not be measured against legal standards as it was a matter of high policy and political judgment and was therefore for politicians to settle. He said, "In my opinion, there has been no contravention of the rule of law. Parliament is the master of its own proceedings. It is for Parliament to decide when it sits. Parliament can sit before and after prorogation." He argued that he said that it was for Parliament and ultimately the electorate to hold the government accountable. So this will now be followed very rapidly by an appeal to the Inner House, which will the campaigners are hoping will be heard later this week, and then probably, if either way, there is likely to be an appeal to the Supreme Court, which would be expected to be heard on the 17th of November. Ian Murray, who was one of the 75 MPs who took part in the action, said the main battle is currently in Parliament, where the Prime Minister has lost his majority and does not have the support of the House for his dangerous plan to impose a no-deal Brexit on the country. We have wrested control of parliamentary business and will attempt to pass a law that makes a no-deal Brexit illegal. We will also fight to secure a final say for the people of the UK on Brexit, and we must campaign to remain in the EU. Mike Russell, the MSP, the Cabinet Secretary for Constitutional Relations, said that he noted the decision and said that the Prime Minister's plan to avoid debate and prevent legislation that would avert a calamitous no-deal exit from the EU should concern all MPs and all citizens, regardless of their views on leaving. The MPs and peers, led by parliamentarians from Scotland who brought this action to assert their right to hold the UK government to account, should be applauded for their efforts. The impact of leaving the EU, and particularly leaving without a deal, will be damaging and profound, and the attempt to deprive the Westminster Parliament of the opportunity to scrutinise the UK government's plans is profoundly undemocratic. So we had some response from the Greens. Patrick Harvey said the decision of the court leaves open the possibility that a Prime Minister could prorogue Parliament indefinitely, and that there is no recourse to challenge this misuse of power. It's clear that the UK's unwritten constitution is not fit for purpose, and that's why Greens have repeatedly said that an independent Scotland must adopt a written constitution which clearly lays out powers and responsibilities. In the meantime, I would urge the petitioners to explore every possible avenue for an appeal against this ruling. UK politics is currently in crisis, and it is vital that Parliament uses all its leverage to control Johnson's menacing regime. Interesting to hear the use of the word regime there. It's not a word that we often hear in relation to democratic countries, but then we are in a situation where democracy is not necessarily in full effect in the UK today. Other things have been happening with inevitably a strong Brexit flavour. The Purchasing Managers Index today shows that the British economy is very close to a recession, or at least the expectation is that it is close to a recession. Headline reading for the Purchasing Managers Index fell to 50.6 from 51.4 in July, which is the barrier is 50 between growth and contraction, and obviously once the economy starts to contract, that's when we have a recession. A Reuters poll of economists had pointed to a reading of 51, but as I say, it's down to 50.6. The people who compile the Purchasing Managers Index say the overall economy looked on track to shrink again in the July to September period at a quarterly rate of 0.1%, a result that would officially herald a recession. And obviously, if we are to leave the EU on the 31st of October, it seems likely that economic confidence will continue to fall. And of course, the damage that would be done to the economy by no deal is likely to be fairly enormous. In Germany, I'm just watching this screen here to see when we're going to have to come back from this vote, but I think I've probably just got time to tell you about what's happening in Germany. Germany sees an increased risk of a no-deal Brexit next month because Britain has so far failed to come up with an alternative proposal to solve the Irish border question. This was a briefing by the German government to the members of the government, the members of Parliament there, saying so far the British government has not made any concrete proposals, the German government said. The likelihood of a disorderly exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union on the 31st of October has thus increased. The British government is currently sticking to its far-reaching demand that the agreement agreed in the withdrawal agreement for the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, the so-called backstop, should be replaced by alternative arrangements. But obviously, as we know, no alternative arrangements have actually been proposed, despite continual assertions by the Brexiteers that alternative arrangements would be possible. The German government also told lawmakers that Brussels and Berlin would ensure that any measures envisaged to address a disorderly Brexit would be in place on the date of Britain's withdrawal, which I think is one of the more salient points in all of this, that the EU didn't want this, has not been exactly enthusiastic about the process, but has at least made concrete plans around virtually every issue that you can imagine might cause problems with Brexit, especially with a no-deal Brexit. Meanwhile, preparations in Britain are still far behind. We are not prepared for it to leave yet, and it does seem unlikely at this stage that we will be ready. It does look like the House is filling back up, and we may be coming back for a vote from the vote on that. So we have, I think we can see 2 tellers. I think that's 2 tellers ready, so we need 3 before we're ready to make an announcement. That does look like the third. That looked like a third one coming in. We'll talk about this story, and I'm sure someone in my ear will warn me if we're missing out. SNP MEPs have been amongst a whole group from the Greens, the English and Welsh Green Party, Labour, Liberal Democrats, the Alliance Party, and Plaid Cymru, who signed the Brussels Declaration today, which states that the proroguing or shutting down the UK Parliament in order to limit the scrutiny of the implications of a potential no-deal Brexit is completely unacceptable, and urges European friends and colleagues to assist domestic efforts in keeping the door open to us. So last month, of course, the SNP group at Westminster also signed the Church House Declaration opposing a no-deal Brexit and any attempt by Boris Johnson to shut down Parliament to force it through. So this is just reasserting that position in the European Parliament and asking for the support of the rest of Europe. Alan Smith, who of course we all remember made that famous speech asking Europe to leave the light on for us, said, "The SNP position is clear. Scotland voted for Europe and we want to remain. Therefore, we will work with colleagues across the parties to ensure the UK and Scotland does not crash out of the EU with a disastrous no deal. We know the damage a no deal will bring. It will cost thousands of jobs and leave millions worse off. It is imperative that Boris Johnson is stopped from forcing through such a scenario, and so I would urge MPs across all parties at Westminster to support today's bill to stop a no-deal Brexit being imposed on the UK without parliamentary consent." He then goes on to discuss something else, which is that we have heard today that the SNP are significantly in the lead in polls for Holyrood and Westminster. Oh, and we are now coming back here, so we'll go
Sergeant
now
Tom's
to
investigate
Westminster.
the no lobby. There somehow seems to be a block in someone.
There appears to be some sort of blockage in the lobby. Somebody is holding matters up. Somebody presumably trying to waste time, cause problems. It's one of these more arcane procedures of the House of Commons that while somebody is still in the voting lobbies, nothing else can happen. So we are just waiting to see what happens there. Yeah, as Mary Black said in that speech that I'm sure many of you have seen, somebody with a sword literally is going in there to chase them out as we speak. We hope it's not just somebody that needs the loo, but we will see, I suppose, when whoever it is emerges, what exactly they may have been trying to achieve. So anyway, while we have a minute, this YouGov poll for the Times in Scotland suggested that the SNP could win 51 of Scotland's 59 seats. The Tories, they expect, would be reduced to 3 and Labour would go down to 1. Presumably then that would leave the Lib Dems with 4. The poll also shows a majority of people in Scotland now agree that Scotland should have the right to choose its future, with support for independence at 49%. Not quite the outright majority we would like to see, but still a very, very encouraging number. 48% of Scots say Boris Johnson being Prime Minister has made independence more likely. 57% of Remain voters say they would vote for independence, which seems surprisingly low. I'm sure we've seen higher figures than that in the past. At Holyrood itself, the SNP remains significantly ahead of all the other parties. The party is on 45% at the moment, which is 22 points clear of the Tories. And if that support were evenly distributed, would probably secure another pro-independence majority in the Parliament. The poll also shows that Nicola Sturgeon is the only party leader seen favourably overall in Scotland. 47% of people said that she was doing well, compared to just 24% for Boris Johnson and just 13% for Jeremy Corbyn. Keith Brown said about the poll, this is a brilliant poll which underlines the strength of opposition to Brexit in Scotland and the increasing support for Scotland having the right to choose our own future amidst the Westminster chaos. With the prospect of an election imminent, this SNP never take a single vote for granted. We will continue to work hard for people across every part of Scotland, doing everything we can to stop Brexit and give the people of Scotland a choice on their future. Scotland has been completely ignored throughout the Brexit process. The people of Scotland deserve the right to choose our own future instead of having it dictated to us by Westminster. It's the same message that's been coming from the SNP really for most of the last 3 years, that it's not acceptable that having voted to remain, that Scotland should be taken out, particularly in a no-deal scenario, without our consent. The SNP there, as Keith Brown said, Ian Blackford actually said today at Prime Minister's Questions to bring on an election if that's what Boris Johnson wants. The SNP, obviously, with poll numbers like that, are feeling very confident, and of course they would be able to put into their manifesto a very clear pledge towards an independence referendum, which, as we saw in the programme for government, which we will get onto in a minute if we don't have too much to talk about from Westminster, then the referendums bill that is going through that will go through the Scottish Parliament shortly, with the backup of a huge majority of SNP seats at Westminster, with a specific mandate for an independence referendum, would be much harder to argue against. I think we are now ready to go back to Westminster.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 65. The noes to the left, 495.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. The ayes to the right, 65. The noes to the left, 495. The noes have it, unlock.
Okay, so that was Amendment 19.
We now come
just being
to
defeated.
Amendment 6. Stephen Kinnock to move formally.
Formally, sir.
Formally. The question is, Amendment 6 be made? As many of that opinion say aye. Aye! The contrary, no. Division, clear the lobbies.
And so we now go to a vote on Amendment 6, which was brought by Stephen Kinnock. I believe this was the amendment about actually passing a withdrawal agreement with a different political declaration. I think that was that one, based on the talks that were held between Theresa May and the Labour Party and other parties back in May. It seems such a long time ago. I had almost forgotten that those talks had occurred when I was reading through the amendments earlier. So we will see how that one goes. I have a suspicion it may be defeated as well, but we will come back to that in probably 20 minutes or so when the vote is completed. Again, these are votes that at Holyrood or virtually anywhere when that comes back, we will let you know. We will be covering the Westminster live for the rest of the night anyway to let you know what happens in the debate that Boris Johnson will be leading on an election shortly after this whole debate on no deal Brexit is completed. So again, Keir Starmer, I think, did we talk about this already? Yes, we did. I think the Labour saying they don't want that we will be looking at that. Again, Ian Blackford saying to bring on an early general election. In other news, Sajid Javid today had announced a spending review or a spending statement, which has increased some funding in some areas. This was after promising a 3-year spending review. This one is just a 1-year spending round, which doesn't include the economics and economic forecasts and the tax decisions that are usually needed in order for the Scottish government to make their own financial plans and pass their own budget. So Derek Mackay said today, despite promises of additional funding from the UK government, the fact remains this announcement gives us no greater certainty, does not undo the damage of austerity, fails to protect us from Brexit, and simply gives just some of the money owed to Scotland. Scottish public services have been constrained by a decade of UK austerity, during which we have lost out on over £12 billion of real terms investment. Today's announcements do little to address the damage caused by UK austerity or the multi-billion funding disputes we have outstanding with the Treasury. The reality is that the money announced today will fail to mitigate the harm caused to Scotland's economy and public services if we leave the EU without a deal on October 31st. Scotland's economy is already being impacted by Brexit austerity. As a responsible government, we are continuing to do all we can to prepare for a no-deal Brexit and provide as much certainty and stability as possible for Scotland's economy and public finances. Now, in a very generous move, according to the Tories, they have claimed to give an extra £160 million to Scottish farming. In a tweet today, the Scottish Tories account did specifically refer to this as extra funding. That was a flat-out lie. This £160 million is money that you may have heard us talking about before. This was convergence money from the Common Agricultural Policy, money that came from the EU. It was meant to go specifically to Scottish farmers whose farms had not kept up with increases to CAP payments for various administrative reasons. And this £160 million was meant to be simply a money that was owed to the Scottish farmers by the Common Agricultural Policy. But as the member state, that money went directly to the Treasury in London, where it was then given to English farmers. It was basically theft, as far as most of us are concerned. It has finally been agreed that it will be returned, although the Westminster government is trying to take credit for this as some act of largesse, when in fact they were just paying back money that was stolen last year and was never paid back. But perhaps the most interesting part of it is that the Tories have tried to dictate how the money should be spent. And Deirdre Brock MP sees this as the thin end of the wedge of the UK government trying to override the devolution settlement and try to dictate how the Scottish government spends its money. So she said today, "Here we have it in black and white. The Tories are conspiring to end devolution as we know it. It was the SNP that fought hard to win back the £160 million owed to Scotland's farmers. We want that money to go straight into their hands. That's a decision the SNP government has already made, as was announced yesterday. It is not for a Tory Chancellor to dictate terms on money that is owed to Scotland. This is the thin end of the wedge, and all parties at Holyrood should stand firmly against such unacceptable attempts to erode the powers of our Parliament. But the bigger issue is this. The Tories think they can tear up the Scotland Act with impunity and undo 20 years of devolution in a single stroke. That's why Scotland must have the choice to determine our own future." And this has been a recurring theme throughout the Brexit process. Of course, we have seen numerous instances of Westminster changing the devolution settlement, grabbing powers back to Westminster that are rightfully Scotland's under the original Scotland Act back in 1997. And once again, we see this Tory government having a very scant regard for what we laughably call a constitution in the UK. As part of this spending review, there are various other monies coming through. The SNP has also pressured Sajid Javid to cough up £3.4 billion. Oh, and I think we are coming back now from that vote.
Thank you. Order. Under the terms of the order of the House yesterday, we now move directly to the third reading of the bill. To move the third reading, I call Mr. Hilary Benn. Thank you. The question is that the bill be now read for the third time. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby.
And yeah, I do apologise for we missed the result of that second vote. We will try and find out whether that amendment passed or not. I rather suspect it didn't, but we will look into that and we will get back to you once we get that. But this is now the vote to whether the bill should have a third reading. We would assume that this will pass probably by about the same margin as the vote earlier, that 329 to 300 on the second reading. And it does, I think it does look like the bill will now go through unamended. So we will then, if this third reading passes, which again we assume that it will, the bill will then go to the Lords tomorrow, and we will have to see what happens with that. There has been talk that the Tory Lords will actually try and filibuster it, talk it out until such times as Boris Johnson is able to prorogue Parliament. So, and in the meantime, as soon as this third reading is over, we will move into that debate on an election. The current debate is expected to happen on the 14th or perhaps the 15th of October, which would give just 2 weeks then before Brexit Day, for the whatever government is elected to make decisions, to make some sort of arrangements, whether that would be for a longer delay, whether it would be for a withdrawal of Article 50 and we just remain, or whether, as Labour seem to be indicating now, if we would then go to a second referendum. Interestingly, just today, while reading up on some of this stuff, we did come across an old interview with Dominic Cumming, one of the architects of Brexit, saying that it would be a perfectly democratic option to have a second referendum after the first one voted to leave.
Tell us for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Tell us for the noes, Stuart Andrew.
Just looking to see what's happening here at Westminster. I think that was just the tellers actually being named. So yeah, we will keep an eye on that, and we'll let you know as soon as they come back. Again, we're pretty confident that this third reading will pass, and then we'll move on with the further discussion about it. And then, as I say, we'll move on to Boris Johnson planning an election. So again, sorry, to go back to this discussion about the spending statement that Sajid Javid made today, pointed out that the SNP had pressured Sajid Javid to cough up this £3.4 billion that was owed to Scotland as a result of the bung essentially given to the DUP for their support of the Tory government. They were given £1 billion, and obviously with the way the Barnett consequentials are worked out, that added up to £3.4 billion. And I'm just getting in my ear that apparently the division on Amendment 6 was cancelled because that amendment has passed. Is that correct? Okay, so sorry. Okay, sorry. The bill has passed unamended now to that third stage. So we'll. I do apologise for that. It's fairly fast moving stuff happening. I'm getting stuff in my ear all the time here. So Kirsty Blackman, MP, the SNP's economy spokesperson, said today about this. The Chancellor's spending review highlights that the decade of deep and damaging Tory austerity that has been imposed on people across Scotland and the UK is far from over, and that Scotland continues to face being shortchanged and sidelined by Westminster. The reality is that the pre-election bribes do not mean an end to austerity, which we know has cumulatively cut the Scottish Bloc grant by £12 billion. Rather than undoing the damage caused by years of austerity, the Tories are pushing ahead with their reckless Brexit plans by wasting billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on a no-deal scenario, a policy which we know will cost thousands of jobs, hit the economy and harm people's livelihoods. The Chancellor must also address the £3.4 billion share of the DUP's Brexit bung due to Scotland. The DUP have stated they will seek to review the confidence and supply agreement they have in place with the Tory government. It would be shameful if the DUP received more money before Scotland received the £3.4 billion Barnett share. There is certainly a great deal of uncertainty over the role of the DUP now, because obviously with those MPs having been expelled from the Tory party, there is no possibility of a formal majority anymore without the support of another party. And even then, I think it would have to be the SNP for it to be a group big enough to form an actual majority. Clearly, we know that's not going to happen. So the DUP's actual role in a confidence and supply agreement now is somewhat moot. Again, this is an evolving situation. We will try and keep up with it, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of this over the coming days and weeks. We will now look at some good news in Scotland. A whole host of stakeholders from the public sector, private sector, and from the third sector have all commented on the Scottish programme for government. There have been a lot of very positive remarks. Philip Milne, for example, from EY, lead partner for government and public sector, said that the Scottish Government's renewed commitments on climate change could bring many opportunities for our economy and challenge how companies see themselves operating in the future. The director of CBI Scotland said that the First Minister's focus on tackling the climate emergency is welcome and that business stands ready to play its role in tackling one of the greatest challenges of our age. The Chief Executive of Colleges Scotland praised the commitment to supporting colleges. The Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland welcomed the £15 million for more services to support children with additional support needs. Rape Crisis Scotland welcomed the announcement of the introduction of the Forensic Medical Services Bill, which is a really interesting bill where victims of rape will be able to get a forensic medical exam without first reporting to the police, which obviously which would mean that an organisation like Rape Crisis might be able to perform the exam when a woman first approaches them, rather than having to encourage her to go to the police before an exam can take place. And obviously with the time issue that can affect evidence in a rape case, I think this is a great development. Stonewall Scotland welcomed the plan for a new hate crime bill to ensure that LGBT people are given the greatest protection possible from hate crimes. The Poverty Alliance and Oxfam Scotland both gave a warm welcome to the announcement that the Scottish Child Payment of £10 a week will begin its rollout next year rather than in 2021, as had previously been predicted. The Poverty Alliance said it promises to loosen the grip of poverty on the lives of 30,000 children across Scotland, while Oxfam Scotland just highlighted that ministers must ensure the cash reaches those trapped deepest in poverty. Obviously, targeting of support is always an issue in any kind of poverty relief efforts, and Oxfam Scotland wanted to highlight that. The policy officer, Chloe True, for Scottish Human Rights, were pleased to see that social care was framed as a human rights issue. Something that the Scottish Government has done generally is try to focus on human rights in things like social care and increasingly in the new Social Security Department that's being developed. The Director of Policy and Public Affairs for the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, Matt Lancashire, welcomed the programme for government as a step towards delivering increased social and economic prosperity. While at the same time, Graham Smith from the STUC welcomed the announcement on bringing forward the child payments. Housing First Scotland said it was great to see the ongoing commitment to scaling up the Housing First approach in Scotland. This is something that the Scottish Government has really put quite a lot of effort into recently in reducing homelessness with a Housing First approach. Crisis Scotland has said, "We are thrilled that the Scottish Government has just announced that they will change the law so that no homeless person has to live in limbo for more than 7 days." This is, again, part of the Housing First strategy, trying to get people out of temporary accommodation as quickly as possible and into their own home, which obviously is a wonderful step forward. Scottish Water said this will have a transformative impact on everything we do. I'm honestly not sure where that quote comes from and in relation to specifically what is going to transform them, but they seem happy anyway, which is always good. The Scottish Drugs Forum said that the programme for government commits a further £20 million over 2 years to support local services and provide targeted support. Because, as they highlight, the recent statistics showing a rise in the number of drug deaths in Scotland mean that the government must act urgently. Samaritans Scotland said, "We've been encouraged to see the Scottish Government make a number of key commitments to improving and promoting well-being. In particular, we welcome steps to expand and improve support for children and young people, including establishing 24/7 crisis support for children and young people, developing open access community wellbeing services, and setting out clear national standards for access to specialist support. Obesity Action Scotland said they were delighted that there was a commitment to legislation on restricting food promotions. This may also form part of the Good Food Nation bill, which we're hoping will be brought forward soon. The British Heart Foundation welcomed the news that they would introduce a women's health plan, which would include action to address inequalities for women with heart disease in Scotland. So that's very interesting. That was one that, to be honest, I had not picked up on yesterday. So that's tremendously good news. Morag Watson, the Director of Policy for Scottish Renewables, said it was pleasing to see the Scottish Government put the climate emergency at the heart of its programme, particularly with welcome new commitments to a heat networks bill and plans to phase out gas in new homes from 2024. It is essential that Scotland's political parties come together to ensure these ambitions become a reality. Gina Hanrahan, the Head of Policy at WWF Scotland, said some quite similar things. It's great to see climate take centre stage in today's programme for government and the Scottish Government's economic and social strategy. This programme of government shows real leadership on the climate emergency with the kind of ambitious and serious actions needed in response to the climate crisis. If carried through, these commitments will slash emissions and deliver benefits to people and the Scottish environment now and for years to come. At a time when all eyes are likely to turn to Scotland ahead of the UN climate talks in Glasgow, it's vital we implement and build on these policies in the next budget and climate plan. And Scott Walker, the Chief Executive of the NFU Scotland, said there was a lot in today's programme to digest, and recognition that farming plays its part in reducing climate change emissions and will be supported through a new agricultural transformation programme to further reduce emissions with a focus on farming being profitable was especially welcome. James Withers, the CEO of Scotland's Food and Drink, said, as we work to take Scotland's growing food and drink sector to the next level, it's good to see critically important elements in the Scottish Government programme for government, international activity, UK market work, a business academy, e-commerce platform and food tourism all getting attention. Sustrans's Deputy CEO John Lauder said Sustrans Scotland welcomes the Scottish Government's commitment to continued investment of around £80 million a year in active travel as announced in today's programme. And Simon Ritchie, the Policy and Campaigns Officer at Age Scotland, said it was very welcome investment of some £500 million in Scotland's bus network announced by Nicola Sturgeon in the programme for government. So a really tremendous set of welcomes for the Scottish Government's programme for government for this year from a variety of stakeholders, from business organisations, charities and others. Really an excellent set of welcomes there. One of the things we did mention in there, the Scottish Child Payment is now expected to be paid ahead of schedule. Low-income families will now be able to apply for a new £10 a week payment for every child aged 0 to 6 years as of next year. As part of measures to lift 30,000 children out of poverty, the Scottish Child Payment, which had been due to launch in 2021, will now open for applications in autumn 2020, with the first payments due to reach families by Christmas. Shirley Ann Somerville, the Social Security Secretary, said, Scotland is facing a spike in child poverty as a result of welfare cuts imposed by the UK government. But this new payment is a game changer for families on low incomes. It will mean more families are able to make ends meet, and there is no cap in the number of eligible children per family, which, as we know, was a very controversial part of reforms to tax credits under the Tories. She said, I am delighted that as part of the programme for government we have been able to confirm that the payment for under 6 can now be introduced even earlier than planned. This will ensure we are able to get more money into the pockets of low-income families sooner than we originally planned. And now it does look like we're about to get the vote on this third reading. sorry, we are still waiting. Again, the time that these things take in Westminster is always mind-boggling. When anyone from any other country looks at our Parliament in London, they are just shocked. And the more that the more time that I spend watching it, the more shocked I am as well. It is an incredibly inefficient system, and it's one reason why these MPs are going to be here all night rather than getting things done much earlier in the day. And it's incredible. There is only 90 minutes scheduled for the debate on a new election, which is due to start immediately after this third reading, but this was due to finish at 7 o'clock. It's already almost 8 o'clock, and the third reading is still to even happen. There will obviously this vote will conclude. Then the third reading debate will happen. I think that is. This is just the vote to say that the third reading has been held. Sorry, and then we'll go to the debate on the election, which, as I say, should take 90 minutes. So if it gets started promptly, it should run on till about 9:30. If there are amendments or any other procedural issues, it could end up taking longer. But it does look now like. No, I think still only 2 tellers. Are there 3 tellers?
Order.
And there we go.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Yes. Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken this evening. And if the other place passes the bill, then I say to the Prime Minister that this House expects him to uphold the law and to fulfil the obligations that will be placed upon him by this bill and prevent this country from leaving the European Union on the 31st of October without a deal. May I also, Mr. Speaker, thank the clerks for their assistance, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Dorset West and others for their great help. And may I also join my Right Honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, in most warmly applauding the bravery and the courage of many on that side of the House who have stood by their convictions in the national interest.
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the House has now approved the bill as amended, could I press the government to, as rapidly as possible, publish the withdrawal agreement bill, which really does require the proper and robust discussion in this place?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has made his own point in his own way, and it is on the record, and we're indebted to him. Deferred divisions motion, the whip to move formally. Thank you. The question is as on the order papers. Most other people say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We now come to the motion on the early parliamentary general election. To move the motion, I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the House of Commons has passed a bill devised by the leader of the opposition, who I see is not in his place. But his colleague, he is characteristically evasive, if not frit, Mr. Speaker. It's a bill that effectively ends the negotiations, a bill that demands an extension at least until next year and perhaps for many more years to come, and a bill that insists Britain acquiesce to to the demands of Brussels and hands control to our partners. It's a bill designed to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our history, the 2016 referendum. And it's therefore a bill without precedent in the history of this House, seeking as it does to force the Prime Minister with a pre-drafted letter to surrender in international negotiations. And I refuse to do this, Mr. Speaker, and it's clear that there is therefore only one way forward for the country. The House has voted repeatedly to leave the EU, and yet it has also voted repeatedly to delay actually leaving. It is voted for negotiations, and today, I'm afraid, it has voted to stop, to scupper any serious negotiations. And what this bill means is that Parliament, or the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, who is still not in his place, Mr. Speaker, and I really don't know where he is, he refuses to give battle, or at least to engage in argument tonight. Perhaps that's a sign of how he intends to pursue things in the weeks ahead. The Right Honourable Gentleman's bill. I'm glad he's now favoured the House with his presence, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman's bill, amongst its other functions, is to take away the right of this country to decide how long it must remain in the EU, and handed that power to the EU. And I'm afraid it is time. That is what it does. That is what it does. And I'm afraid it is time for this country to decide whether that is right. The country must now decide whether the Leader of the Opposition or I go to those negotiations in Brussels on the 17th of October to sort this out. Because everybody will know that if the Right Honourable Gentleman were to go there, were to be the Prime Minister, he would beg for an extension. He would accept whatever Brussels demands, and we would then have years more dither and delay, yet more arguments over Brexit, and no resolution to the uncertainty that currently bedevils this country and our economy. And everyone knows by contrast that if I am Prime Minister, I will go to Brussels and I will try to get a deal, and believe me, I know that I can get a deal. But if they, Mr. Speaker, if they won't do a deal, I think it would be eminently sensible for them to do so, and as I say, I believe that they will. Then, under any circumstances, this country will leave the EU on October the 31st. Mr. Speaker, it is completely impossible for government to function if the House of Commons refuses to pass anything that the government proposes. And in my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday the 15th of October, and I invite the Right Honourable Gentleman to respond, to decide which of us goes as Prime Minister to that crucial council on Thursday the 17th of October. I think it's very sad that MPs have voted like this, but if I'm still Prime Minister, I do. I think it's a great dereliction of their democratic duty, Mr. Speaker. But if I'm still Prime Minister after Tuesday the 15th of October, then we will leave on the 31st of October with, I hope, a much better deal. The Leader of the Opposition now has a question to answer. He has demanded an election for 2 years while blocking Brexit. He said only 2 days ago that he would support an election. And now, Parliament having passed a bill that destroys the ability of government to negotiate, is he now going to say that the public cannot be allowed an election to decide which of us sorts out this mess? I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. The country doesn't want an election. But this House has left no other option than letting the public decide who they want as Prime Minister, and I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the second time I've replied to a Conservative Prime Minister seeking to dissolve Parliament to call an election because they didn't have a deliverable Brexit policy. Although I'm not condemning the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead by comparing her to a successor, she at least made detailed speeches setting out her Brexit policy, even if we fundamentally disagreed with them. This Prime Minister claims he has a strategy, but he can't tell us what it is. The bigger problem for him is that he hasn't told the EU what it is either. And at Prime Minister's question time today, as with the statement yesterday, he was unable to say whether he's even made any proposals whatsoever to the EU. And it's basically a policy that's cloaked in mystery, like the Emperor's new clothes. There really is absolutely nothing there. And the naked truth is that the reality is deeply unpalatable. A disastrous no-deal Brexit to take us into the arms of a trade deal with Donald Trump that will put America first and Britain a distant second. The Prime Minister knows there is no mandate for no deal, no majority support for it in the country, and no majority for it in this House. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the co-convener of the Vote Leave campaign, said in March this year, we didn't vote to leave without a deal. Even the leaders of the Leave campaign are absolutely clear that the referendum confirmed no mandate for no deal. No deal. No deal. No deal. No deal is opposed by every business group, every industry body, every trade union, and by this House, as today's votes and others have shown. Mr. Speaker, we want an election because we look forward to turfing this government out. And
does the Leader of the Opposition want a general election? A yes or no will suffice.
Well, he obviously didn't hear what I just said. I was about to point out, before I was gently interrupted by the Honourable Member, that the offer of the election today is a bit like the offer of an apple to Snow White and the Wicked Queen, because what he's offering is not an apple or even an election, but the poison of a no deal. So, Mr. Speaker, I repeat what I said last night. Let this bill pass and gain royal assent, then we will back an election so we do not crash out with a no-deal exit from the European Union. And so it's the anti-democratic instincts of this government that cause us concern. Despite the expressed will of the House to support the bill debated today, the Conservative peers, their colleagues in the Lords, have tabled 92 amendments for debate. I really doubt this is motivated by a desire to improve the legislation, not a bit of it, but to filibuster it. An undemocratic cabal in Downing Street, aligned with an undemocratic and unelected House to override the democratic will of this House expressed in the bill that we have just given a third reading to. If they can't win the argument, they try to shut down debate. We had the Prime Minister deciding to prorogue Parliament in August. and today he wants to dissolve Parliament to shut down scrutiny. He cannot handle dissent. He cannot handle dissent and debate in his own party, and has extraordinarily expelled 21 of his own MPs who voted against him last night. The hypocrisy of this process is phenomenal. From a Prime Minister who twice voted against the last Prime Minister's Brexit plans. A general election isn't a plaything for a Prime Minister to avoid his obligations, to dodge scrutiny or renege on commitments. He is committed to renegotiate Brexit, but where is it? Where is the plan? Where are the proposals? If he has a Brexit plan, be it no deal or the new mystery proposal deal that we've yet to see any information of, then he should put it before the public in a public vote, a referendum or a general election, and seek a mandate for them. Let the Prime Minister go to Brussels tomorrow and ask for an extension so that he can seek a mandate for his unknown Brexit plan and put it before the people. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion from the Prime Minister is about playing a disingenuous game that are unworthy of his office. I look forward to the day his government and his party and all their austerity and misery they've heaped on this country are turfed out of office, and we prevent this country crashing out on the 31st of October with all the damage he knows, because he's already seen the documents, it will do to people's lives and job prospects in this country. It's a cynical movement from a cynical Prime Minister.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Well, I don't know whether the House wants a debate. I'll be very, very brief. I was going to join in if other people were going to debate, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for encouraging me. No doubt the deep distress of everybody else waiting to have an important vote. I merely say that I found these exchanges quite predictable. They've been well rehearsed before we took place. I do think the Prime Minister, with the greatest respect, has a tremendous skill in keeping a straight face whilst he's being so disingenuous. The fact is, he's now desperate to have an election in order to bring this House's proceedings to an end and to have the general election clearly before October the 31st. And he's obviously going to campaign before that on the basis that he's been thwarted in getting an amazing beneficial deal for this country, which is actually being blocked by wicked continental politicians and by politicians and the MPs in the House of Commons who have no sense of the true national interest, which is to keep him in power. It's wrong to say that the opposition to him is trying to reverse the referendum. A very large percentage of those who've been defeating him in the last 2 days are prepared to vote for Brexit. They voted for Brexit more often than he has. He caused delay in March and he caused delay in April, but we wish to do so on satisfactory and reasonable terms. We now have a bill which is the beginning of a pathway to actually give us more time for grown-up, sensible, diplomatic exchanges between countries. The idea that on the European Union, they're refusing us a deal because they really think they're going to trap us in permanently is nonsense. They're desperate to get a deal, but of course they're desperate to get a deal, but not so desperate that they're going to accept terms which will cause chaos in Northern Ireland, politically and economically, and will shatter the normal rules which hold together the single market and the customs union upon which they're based. The Prime Minister has thrown down dramatic conditions which he must know make any sensible negotiations pointless unless he changes his direction. He's now Prime Minister. He's now a responsible politician with huge responsibility. I urge him one last time to stop treating all this as a game and to use the time to actually get a serious resolution of these impossible problems to look after the future goodwill of this country, keeping us in a proper, no doubt different relationship with our partners on the continent, and in particular keeping our economic and trading relationships intact, because they're essential for the future of our children and grandchildren.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate with all my heart the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe, who's, I have to say, as he has done on many occasions where I've followed with him, spoken with great sense. And I have to say to the Prime Minister, I'll give you a piece of friendly advice, Prime Minister. Sack your adviser, Dominic Cummings, and bring in the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe that might actually be able to give you some sensible advice. You know, Mr. Speaker, we're having this debate tonight quite simply because the Prime Minister's been defeated. That's the reality. And my question to the Prime Minister is, this House is supposed to be sovereign in his eyes. Accept the will of this House. Accept the bill that Parliament has passed. Accept your duty as Prime Minister and go to the European Council on the 17th of October and negotiate the extension that you've now been told to deliver. Mr. Speaker, yet again this government has been defeated by a majority in the House of Commons against a no-deal Brexit. The passage of the bill tonight to block no deal is a victory, not just for democracy, but yes, for common sense. And I pay tribute to the members of Parliament across these benches who've worked tirelessly to build consensus for this legislation to pass and remove the cliff edge catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister shouldn't be talking about surrender. He should be congratulating members of Parliament that have stood up for all our national interests. And really, what a disgrace for a Prime Minister to accuse parliamentarians, decent parliamentarians, of surrender. It simply lacks dignity, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, now Parliament has once again displayed its will. The Prime Minister must show respect for democracy and agree to abide by the will of Parliament on the bill blocking no deal.
Calm down, Boris.
Look, if you wish to intervene rather than shouting at me, I will give you the courtesy that you didn't applaud me. If you would like to rise.
I've been listening to the Honourable Gentleman with great care, but the one thing that he doesn't say in all of this is that the reason he has voted tonight for this bill is because he and his party are adamantly opposed to ever delivering Brexit. So will he now admit on his feet that that is his purpose and that is the purpose of this bill?
My heavens, Mr. Speaker, I think it's quite clear if anyone reads the bill what it's about. It's about removing the cliff edge of the 31st of October. And yes, we in the SNP have worked with colleagues right around this House. We've worked in a spirit of consensus. But yes, of course, I wish to stop Brexit and Scotland being dragged out. And I say this to the Right Honourable Gentleman, that we will work collectively with everybody here, but I have a responsibility with my colleagues to stop this government dragging Scotland out of Europe against its will. And the message to the Prime Minister and the Right Honourable Gentleman, will you respect democracy in Scotland, and will you respect that Scotland has voted to remain in the European Union? Mr. Speaker, it is the SNP's top priority to avoid no deal. We know the devastation a no-deal Brexit would bring to people in Scotland and across these islands. That's why we've been working hard for the past 2 years to avoid no deal. SNP MPs have voted consistently against no deal. We have supported the Letwin-Cooper process in March to avoid a no deal, and now we're doing the same with the Benn Bill.
On that, would the Honourable Member give way? Thank you very much. I welcome the honourable member's confirmation tonight, that the right honourable member's confirmation tonight that he will, along with ourselves in the Labour Party, vote against the government. But if the government continues to pursue this reckless no-deal policy, will you continue to work with us to block any attempt to take us off the cliff edge against the will of Parliament?
Yes. Well, I mean, the simple answer is yes. I commit myself to working with all others, because we have a responsibility to our constituents to stop that disaster of no deal. And indeed, I've been working with leaders of other parties to ensure that the Benn Bill passes tonight. We've come together to ensure that protecting the lives of people across the United Kingdom and their livelihoods is the absolute priority of this Parliament. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we keep working together. Mr. Speaker, no one voted for a no-deal Brexit. It wasn't on the ballot paper, and the Prime Minister needs to wake up to that reality. And perhaps, Prime Minister, you might actually start listening to the debate rather than chatting to the Chancellor, if you don't mind. It is important that no tricks are deployed to avert the course of the democracy over the coming days. And you can try and shout us down. You tried last night and it won't work. The unelected House of Lords should not under any circumstances seek to damage or kill the protections in legislation. And the Prime Minister should quit game-playing stunts. The SNP will not fall for them. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party is ready for an election. We stand ready to bring down the Tory government and give Scotland the chance to stop Brexit and decide its own future. We signal our intent to work with all across this House to stop a no-deal Brexit. It is in all our interest to do so. But I also say to this House, we will do our duty to protect all of us from a no-deal Brexit. But at the same time, this House should respect the sovereignty of the Scottish people and our rights to be able to determine our own future.
And I'm grateful to my right honourable men getting on the way. I don't know if you noted last night, but the lack of enthusiasm from Scottish Conservatives for this early general election. It might have something to do with the fact that they're now at 20% in the polls and due to be decimated. Wouldn't it, if they vote for this tonight, be turkeys voting for Christmas? And if Ruth Davison can't stomach the Prime Minister, why should Scotland?
Well, my honourable friend is quite right, and I look forward to SNP challengers standing in these Scottish Tory seats, and we will take the fight to those constituents over the course of the coming weeks and make sure those constituents have that opportunity to return those seats to the Scottish National Party. Mr. Speaker, much of this debate has been about democracy. It is about the abuse of power by a government seeking to shut down Parliament. This House must respect the Scottish Parliament and, in particular, the mandate the Scottish Government has for a referendum on independence. It should be Scotland's right to choose its own future, not the right of this Prime Minister or any other in Westminster to tell Scotland that our votes do not matter, that we cannot determine when Scotland votes in an independence referendum. Mr. Speaker, an election is coming, and I invite Scotland to send a message to Westminster. It is Scotland's right to choose. The Times poll today shows that the SNP is set to win a majority of Westminster seats in any election. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, we relish an election because we want to stop Brexit for good. We want to stop the Tories, to stop this Prime Minister. And most importantly, we want to give the people a say, their choice to decide their own future. However, Mr. Speaker, we will not be party to the Prime Minister's games and allow the Prime Minister to use an election to force a no-deal Brexit through the back door. Simply put, the SNP cannot support this motion tonight because we do not trust the Prime Minister. And who could blame us? His tall tales, his contempt for democracy and his government's broken promises to the people of Scotland. We cannot trust that he will allow this bill to pass and remove the cliff edge before an election. And I urge other opposition parties, tonight we will not give the Prime Minister the opportunity to bring in a no deal through the back door. But we cannot allow a government that has lost its majority, that does not command the House, that has treated this Parliament and this country with contempt, to remain in office for one more day longer than is necessary. The Prime Minister is going to shut this Parliament down so he can spend 4 weeks running the clock down. We could instead use that time to run him out of office. Once a no deal has been blocked, MPs across this House, on the opposition benches, should come together to bring down this government, not on the Prime Minister's terms, but on the right terms. Mr. Speaker, time is of the essence over the next few days in order to remove the cliff edge and to remove this shambolic, irresponsible, incompetent Tory government from office.
Craig McKinley.
So that was Ian Blackford saying that the SNP will not support the motion tonight for an early election, but will be pursuing, presumably, a no-confidence vote sometime in the next few days. We will be following the rest of the debate on Broadcasting Scotland for the rest of the evening. It probably has another hour or so to run, plus however long it takes to get through any amendments and votes. But that is all from Scotland at 7 for now. Thank you very much for joining us. As usual, if you are able to afford a few pounds to support us, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland and help us to build an independent Scottish media. We are just going to go straight back to Westminster now. So thank you very much for joining me. I've been Kenny McBride, and this has been Scotland at 7.
Of the same of a moribund Parliament, while a public simply shakes its head at dismay at what is going on in this place. Mr. Speaker, it's bizarre, isn't it? There are those in this House who will not countenance leaving the European Union without a deal. And that is, I will give way.
Because it's very clear that the Prime Minister wants a cut-and-run general election. And surely if he loses the vote tonight that he's called, as he's lost many other votes, the Prime Minister should simply follow his convictions and resign. Yes. Go, but no, we know he wants cut and run before the disaster that's coming. He'll be lashed to the tiller and lashed to the disaster, and he should know that.
Well, I certainly hope after that intervention that he will be supporting this tonight so that the people can make their decision as well. I will give way.
Has my honourable friend ever heard so many people sitting opposite us for the last 2 years crying out for an early general election? The Prime Minister is now giving them that opportunity and they're running scared. They're running scared not just from the Prime Minister, not just from the next general election, but they're running scared from the people of this country who in 2016 said they wanted to leave the European Union. And it's the people opposite denying them that opportunity to leave the EU. Does he agree with me that if the British people get given this chance to have an early general election, that the Conservative Party will win that election?
I thank my honourable friend for that very powerful intervention. I couldn't agree with him more. Just to get back on track, there are those in that place who will not countenance leaving without a deal. And it's quite strange, isn't it? They're the same people who go to their local market every week and they will walk away from that trade if the price isn't right or the quality isn't right. Now, I would ask the Leader of the Opposition, I've got a rusty old heap of a car. It's yours for £15,000. I'm sure he'll just take it without looking at it any further. But when this House was presented with a withdrawal agreement by the previous administration, I obviously voted against it because I felt it was a lousy, rotten deal. I don't need to put those objections further tonight. But there are others, and I'm looking at them. I'm looking at those many others who voted against that deal, the now defunct withdrawal agreement, because of pure party politics. Now let me make progress. They claim they wanted a deal. And as we know, that withdrawal agreement gave the vassalage and the perpetual homage to the EU that many of them now seem to crave. What is now clear, Mr. Speaker, is that this House would not agree a deal even if it were gold-plated. This House no longer reflects the will of the people of this country, who gave that clear message to us, to this Parliament, that we would respect that vote in 2016. They want us to get on with a job. They want us to leave on October the 31st. They've waited long enough. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament serves no further purpose. It is time for a general election. It's time for that people's vote that many are asking for. It's time to actually stop those critics who say that our Prime Minister isn't properly elected. You can put that right by voting tonight for a general election. And I support that wholeheartedly. Just
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say thank you to the MPs in different parts of the House, particularly the honourable members and right honourable members who have worked so hard on the bill that we all passed tonight. It is that cross-party working, putting the party interest to one side and putting the national interest first, that is what the country expects us to do. And in particular, colleagues on the Conservative benches have stuck to their principles and done what they think is right and should be commended for that. And I have to say, I think the way that they have been treated has been shameful. I'm intrigued that as a result of the House of Commons saying very clearly that we will not countenance crashing out of the EU with no deal, the Prime Minister's response is that this somehow messes up his plan. It's as if it's news to him that the House of Commons does not want a no-deal exit. Was he not paying attention on the previous occasions that we voted to say there should not be a no-deal exit? Is he seriously saying that the extent of his plan was to try to bully the EU and that he could only get a good deal by threatening that we would leave without a deal? Because if that is the extent of his plan, it is not very well thought through. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Could she confirm, if there was a general election, that Liberal Democrats will be putting in their manifesto a pledge to revoke Article 50?
It's of no surprise to the Honourable Lady that the Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. We have been crystal clear on stopping Brexit, and for all there are different views on different sides of the House about that, I don't think anyone can accuse us of not being straightforward about where we stand. In terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says, I've already given way. The terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says that he now can't do this negotiation because we are taking no deal off the table. But we know there are not serious negotiations anyway. The word disingenuous was used by the Father of the House, and I think it is accurate. The Prime Minister has wanted the job that he has for so long, it has been almost painful to watch. He has been prepared to say anything and do anything to get that job. And he said, I've given way, he has said, we will get a great deal. Well, now he has the job. That is the job. Go and get a great deal. But he knows that he was just saying whatever came into his head to get the job. He knows knows he cannot get the great deal because there is no such thing as a great Brexit deal, and he is scared of being found out. I've already given way to somebody on his benches. I'm going to say what I have to say. The way I think this is best resolved is by putting this issue to the people in a people's vote to decide on the Brexit way forward, because I do not believe there is a majority in this country for any specific type of Brexit deal. I'm not even convinced there's a majority in the Conservative Party for any type of Brexit deal. But we could have a general election, and I say to the Prime Minister, such an election should be held in a responsible, calm and orderly way, not with the threat of crashing out with no deal either during the campaign or in the immediate aftermath. So if he wants an election, extend Article 50 for the purposes of having a general election and bring it on. And if he's not prepared to do that, don't be surprised when people are not fooled by his tactics and vote against him.
Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, there is one purpose in denying this motion tonight, and that is to ensure that the British people have no say whatever over what takes place at the European Council on the 17th of October. Isn't it?
Anna Soubry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important that in this debate we are all very mindful of the language that we use. And it has been concerning that honourable and right honourable members opposite, including our Prime Minister, has chosen to use the word frit and frightened of those of us who believe that the last thing that this country needs is a general election. Given everything that has happened in the last few years, there are a number of people in this place of whom they could not be accused of being frightened. In fact, it's taken a lot of courage for some people. And if honourable members opposite aren't familiar with courage, they might want to talk to some of those honourable members who they've just booted out of their own party. Decent, long-serving, hugely loyal members of the Conservative Party who last night and again today chose to put their constituents and their country first. And the price that they have paid is to see the end of their parliamentary career. And this House is right, Mr. Speaker, to commend each and every one of them for the considerable courage that they took. Mr. Speaker, I am in no doubt whatsoever that it's not just the people of Broxtowe, but the people of this country who are thoroughly fed up to the back teeth with Brexit. I don't doubt that. And that is why I am of the very firm view that the matter of Brexit must be brought to a conclusion. There are people in this place who will know in the many cross-party conversations that we have had, and I am proud that we have worked together across parties, putting aside our normal differences, again in the country's interest. That my view was that any extension should not go beyond certainly January, maybe February of next year, because of the profound need that we must bring this matter, as I say, to a conclusion. And that is one of the reasons why I will give way one moment. That is one of the reasons why I don't believe a general election is the answer at all, because it will not solve the Brexit crisis. And of course I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Honourable Lady for giving way. The second part of the bill that she just approved actually handed power to the EU to dictate whatever extension they wanted. That is what they said.
We have read.
I'm so sorry to tell the Honourable Lady, but she's obviously been reading something completely different to the rest of us, because it most absolutely does not. This bill has been carefully drafted, and properly so, to make sure that it is in the interests of our country that we take no deal off the table, because that's the best thing for this country. That bill, and I'm quite happy to take an intervention rather than her just shouting at me. That bill is all about not stopping Brexit, as many of us would like to do, but it's about stopping no deal for all the reasons that have been explained. I'll quickly give way.
Will she agree with me that actually a no-deal Brexit is no way out of this Brexit conundrum? It will follow years and years of difficulties, and it is dishonest, it is not right to say that actually a no-deal Brexit will solve the Brexit issue.
The Honourable Lady is right, and not only is she right about no deal, she's also right that the former Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement also would not have ended the debate about Brexit, because it was a blindfolded Brexit that did not determine our future trading relationship with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, my views on this are well known. I believe the only way out of the crisis is to have now a people's vote. Put that deal that the former Prime Minister, well, it wasn't a deal, but at least it was something, put that to the British people with Remain on the ballot paper, and let's get this matter over. I believe the British people have also changed their minds. I think they are now seeing Brexit for what it is, and I think given the opportunity they would vote for the best deal, and that's the current deal that we have with the European Union. That's another good reason why this matter must now go back to the British people by way of a people's vote.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith. Right, only briefly, because I know we want to get through this, but in response to this, the reality about this tonight is this is about a general election. And what we've had is speeches from a number of people on the opposite benches, which are all about nothing to do with the general election, all about recycling the debate that we had earlier. The truth is, there is but a simple question in front of the opposition parties. Only 2 days ago, they were crying out for an election. The shadow Chancellor said, "Bring it on, we're ready for it." The leader of the opposition, when he wasn't having his afternoon nap and awake enough to be able to meet the media, said he wanted to have an election. The Scottish nationalists were adamant that they were going to vote for an election. And the reality... No, wait a minute. The Honourable Gentleman has made a fool of himself already. He should stay put. I'm doing him a favour. What I can say, I am really doing him a favour. He may not understand it. But the reality right now, Mr. Speaker, as we are in this debate, the question therefore is, if they don't vote for an election tonight, if they refuse to vote to have that election, then they are running away from what is their democratic responsibility. I say to those like the Honourable Lady, one time my honourable friend, no, honestly, he really doesn't want to do himself any disfavour any longer. I say to the Honourable Lady that was up earlier that she talks about a people's vote. The problem with a people's vote, if she wants to put it to a referendum, as the new leader of the Liberal Party said, she would never accept the result if, wait a minute, if they said they wanted to leave, they would not accept the result. Now, wait a minute. No. Let me finish this, because it's important. So here's the fault line. Without a different parliament, a new referendum will change absolutely nothing if it votes to leave again, because we'll come back to this parliament, and all that will happen is they will stop, delay and try and defeat that motion. So the decision tonight is the only decision that can be made in all reality, which is if you want to decide whether the British people were right to vote leave or wrong, put it to them in a general election and let them now make that decision. And I see the honourable gentleman opposite shaking his head, simply because only days ago he and his colleague on the front bench...
Order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, but the right honourable gentleman said something about me which is simply not accurate. And I asked if I could intervene. He didn't allow me, which I accept is his absolute right. But I think the record should record I have always said this matter goes back to the British people, and they vote for Mrs May's deal, sorry, the former Prime Minister's deal, or some new magical unicorn deal. As far as I'm concerned, Mr Speaker, that's the end of it.
I'm going to bring this conclusion, Mr Speaker. I say to my honourable friend, if she wants a people's vote, the people's vote is in front of us tonight in this debate. It is called a general election. I have never seen a moment when an opposition party does not want to take over. This is a bizarre affair when they're running away from actually trying to defeat a government. Let's have that election. No. Let us have that election. Let us make that decision. And if the right honourable gentleman who leads the Labour Party right now genuinely believes in democracy, put up or shut up.
Yes, Phillips.
Mr Speaker, I very much wish to talk about a general election, as the right honourable gentleman before me has criticised others for not doing so. I want to, I suppose, speak really, really plainly and say that tonight I will absolutely vote against a general election, just like I would vote against pretty much anything the current Prime Minister put in front of me, because they have I'm going to warn Mr Speaker that I'm not cracking on the old parliamentary, the protocols and everything, and I fear I may say some things that are unparliamentary. Please feel free to alert me to them. I have absolutely no faith in anything that the current Prime Minister says. Literally none. I wouldn't trust him. Am I allowed to say that? I wouldn't trust him. As well, I mean, there's literally no distance that I could trust him. No, so yes, members on the other side say so. Stand in an election. I have absolutely no fear that I would hold my seat in an election. Absolutely none whatsoever. However, the Prime Minister does not. The Prime Minister that we have at the moment is playing some bully boy game of some bully boy public school that I probably won't understand any more than I understand parliamentary procedures. And I am absolutely sorry. Would the honourable gentleman like to make an intervention? Crack on.
Order. The honourable lady says that she doesn't understand parliamentary procedure, but on the whole she doesn't shriek from a sedentary position. The honourable gentleman has been in this House for 14 years. If he wishes to contribute, he can seek to catch my eye. He shouldn't chunter from a sedentary position in evident disregard for the procedures of the House. Just Phillips.
So the reality is that what we have here is a game where we're not being told what the rules are. The Prime Minister could bring a deal to this House. He could tell us what his plans are for Northern Ireland. He could tell us what his plans are for trade. And I will give way in one moment. And he could... Yesterday I watched Conservative colleagues begging him to tell them what he wanted. Begging him. Yeah, churra a bit, Bab. I saw colleagues begging him to say, give us a deal to vote for. This is not... The Prime Minister has stood in front and said, I don't want an election, I don't want an election. This is some game that three men in Parliament, in number 10 Downing Street, have come up with to try and game the system so that they win. The people in my democratic responsibility is to try and do the absolute best for the people in my constituency. And at the moment, it's not all that clear. We're all a little bit confused. But I am absolutely not going to use them as a chitty in a game for the Prime Minister to achieve the ambition that he has only ever had for himself and never for this country. I am not going to use my constituents as collateral damage. I will give way.
Lady, forgive me, it's clear. And one of the things that people watching this should be aware of
is that we all know in here they want a cut-and-run election. The election they don't want is the 14th or the 21st of November. That's the election that we'll take them out on.
I absolutely agree, and I will not personally, I will not vote for any election that falls before the 31st of October. I absolutely will.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I also will not be voting for a general election today because I do not want in any way for a no deal in this country, because it will not only harm my constituents, it will harm the 22,000 EU nationals who are living in my constituency. We have in this country the Home Secretary saying that the freedom of movement will end at midnight on the 31st of October, which means that my EU citizen...
I mean, I couldn't agree with my honourable lady more. There are thousands of EU migrants in my constituency, and lots of them have absolutely no idea what the situation is going to be for them. I have to represent those people as much as I represent the people who would be allowed to vote in a general election or allowed to vote in a referendum. Go on.
Grateful for the honourable lady giving way. Isn't the truth that both her and many of her colleagues don't want a general election because they're as scared as we are of the Leader of the Opposition becoming Prime Minister?
I'm more than happy. Let's make no bones about the fact that I am not able to be completely critical when I think things are wrong, both in my party and in your the governing party. It's just a shame that quite a lot of the people who are sat in front of me, who know what has happened over the last 2 days is wrong, are too cowardly to actually say to me in here, in public, what they're all saying in the tea rooms. You know what has happened over here. It's as if we were kicking out Harriet Harman. That is what it feels like. It is an abomination the way your party has behaved. Absolutely. You've all crowed and given sympathy to me about the problems that we have in the Labour Party, and you've just sat by silently while your colleagues have been marched out.
You're giving way. Very well. Yes, indeed.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And the point she makes about the fact that how the party on that side has treated its very loyal members of Parliament, whatever else might have said, I think it's unheard of in parliamentary history that an MP who's voted against his party to have the whip suspended. That is a bully boy tactic.
I'm going to round up my comments. I agree entirely. I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, although there's plenty of Brendas in Birmingham. And I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, and the reason that I don't think that we should have a general election and the reason I won't vote for it is because I think, actually, we shouldn't go on conference recess. We shouldn't be proroguing Parliament. We are currently in a national crisis. This is not a game. This is not some toy that we can play with. The British public think that we should... I'm not going to give way anymore. I apologise. I have given way plenty of time. The British public, if you were to go out into the street and ask them, they think that we should be in here doing our jobs. They think that we're away from here too often anyway. I am appalled by the prorogation, and from now on, let's call it shutting down of Parliament, because I literally hate the word prorogation, and the people outside probably don't understand what we're talking about half the time. The shutting down of Parliament has essentially killed a bill that I have worked on for 2.5 years, something that people in this House have deeply held feelings on, and I'm meant to believe that the Prime Minister is really doing this because he has a vision for the people in this country. He has a vision that comes to him every night, and it is his own face. I will vote against an election until the end of October, until this is sorted, because the British public want me here working for them, and that is what I will do.
Nigel Evans.
Speaker, well, no doubt her constituents do want her working here and representing her. And she talked about this being a national crisis, and it is a national crisis, but it's a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of trust in politicians. It's a crisis of trust in democracy as well, because it was this House that decided to give the British public the referendum in 2016, and I know the expectation was that the British public would not vote to leave the European Union, but when they listened to all the arguments, they decided that they wished to leave. Following that, we had a general election. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party both stood on a similar platform on Brexit, and that was that we were going to deliver the Brexit the people voted for. Now, I remember the ballot paper. It said, do you want to remain or leave the European Union? It was a basic binary question. And the fact is that 17.4 million people in this country decided that they wished to leave the European Union, and the margin was about 1.4 million. And the expectation, because of that pamphlet that David Cameron ensured got sent to all the households in the United Kingdom, and on the back of it, it said that we will deliver what the British people had voted for. That was in 2016. Today, we are September 2019. We should have left on March the 29th, but we didn't. Then we should have left on February the 12th, but we didn't. Then the then Prime Minister said, I cannot contemplate a date beyond June the 30th of us leaving. And we didn't. And now it's October the 31st. And we've just given a third reading to a bill that will extend that by another 3 months. Unless, of course, the European Union decide that they want it greater than 3 months, because then that is something that we will have to accept. Yes, I'll give way.
For giving away, but I mean, he can have his beliefs, but he can't have his own facts. The bill that we've passed tonight does absolutely nothing unless the Prime Minister fails to come back from the European Council with a deal. And if he comes back with a deal, we then vote on it on the 19th. If the House votes for that deal, we leave the European Union with that deal. If that deal doesn't pass this House, then this House has to vote on no deal. And if the House doesn't agree with no deal, that is when we go for the extension. Those are the facts about what we've done. It does nothing to the negotiations of the Prime Minister. That is a complete fallacy. And what is happening here is that this government is being run by Nigel Farage, and that is what's going on here.
The fact is, what this House did today, quite clearly, was to weaken the negotiating position of the Prime Minister. And we all know that Michel Barnier and the European Union listen very carefully to this Parliament, and in fact, they have a direct line, some MPs in this Parliament, to Michel Barnier and Juncker and Tusk. They're in fairly well daily contact with them sometimes. There's one over there. And we know what they're saying. They're saying, don't give in to the British Prime Minister because we can resist Brexit. And that's what's going to happen. We know that the British Prime Minister is already in discussions with people like Angela Merkel and various others within the European Union to ensure that the problems that existed in the old deal are removed. But by the bill that was passed tonight, it gives the European Union no incentive whatsoever to come to the negotiating table and to have a proper negotiation. And I've just come to the mind, and I know the Liberal Democrats are at least the honest party, as well as the Scottish Nationalists now, of saying that they do not wish to leave the European Union. And in fact, when we've had that referendum and the people have voted to leave, I just wonder which part of Liberal Democrat is actually Democrat. Because they clearly are not interested in what the British people voted for in 2016. They asked for a second vote, but what we're offering tonight is a general election, and that can be a second vote, because the people will look at the policies of the Labour Party under its current leader and look at the policies of my party under its current leader, and they will decide who of the two Prime Ministers, or the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, will go to Brussels and then have that negotiation on October the 17th. But part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, and we all know it, is that during the 2016 referendum, 3/4 of this chamber voted to remain in the European Union. They do not want to leave the European Union, and they will do anything that they possibly can to frustrate us from leaving the European Union. Yes, of course I will.
I think it would be more accurate and kinder to have had a full stop and a pause after saying who voted which way in the referendum, before going on to suggest that those who voted one way have been voting the same way during the debate on leaving the European Union. I voted 3 times to leave the European Union. I wish the same thing could be said about some of the zealots on my side.
Well, the fact is that we now have a Prime Minister who believes in the mission, who wants to negotiate honestly with the European Union and be able to deliver the Brexit that people really voted for, which is to leave the customs union, leave the single market, not pay in vast sums of money to the European Union as we currently do, to control our own immigration and not to be just decidable by the European courts, and certainly not to have a backstop that keeps us in the European Union without our permission of ever having to leave. What I would say, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is, as I said, 3/4 of this Parliament voted to remain in the European Union, and the vast majority of those still do not wish us to leave. And the fact is this: the British people have voted to leave the European Union, and if this Parliament decides that we are not going to leave the European Union, then the British people ought to have the opportunity to change its Parliament, and they can do that tonight.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This attempt to dissolve Parliament is a desperate and utterly cynical move, and I am delighted that tonight it's been made very, very clear by all of the opposition parties that we are not falling for it. The Prime Minister can own his own horrendous mess, because he is trying to smuggle out this no-deal Brexit during an election campaign. And that's what makes it so vital that no election happens before there is an extension of Article 50, before it's agreed, and crucially before it's implemented as well. Now, I notice that the Prime Minister has himself scuttled off. He can't even be bothered to listen to the debate on his own motion on something as important as a general election. But let me say that there are numerous reasons why many of us want to get rid of this cruel and callous government. And believe me, I am one of those who absolutely wants to do that, not least because this is a government, for example, which is not only not doing anywhere near enough to tackle the climate crisis, they are actively exacerbating it with fracking, with fossil fuel subsidies and so on. This is also a government that has the arrogance to claim that the so-called bumps in the road, that the no-deal Brexit is going to be just bumps in the road. How dare they? They might be bumps in the road to a front bench who has the luxury to be insulated from the impacts of that disastrous no-deal Brexit. But for most of our constituents, a no-deal Brexit spells real disaster, and it is not bumps in the road. And the mere fact that they could use that phrase suggests just how out of touch they are with their own constituents. But a general election on the Prime Minister's terms right now is a trap. It will not resolve the Brexit crisis. Elections are very rarely fought on one issue alone, and first past the post is notoriously bad at reflecting the true views of the public in the seats that are then won. If we are to break the Brexit deadlock in Parliament, then the people must lead the way. Now, the Prime Minister regularly asserts his commitment to the will of the people, so why is he not prepared to listen to what the people want now, specifically on Brexit, go back to them in a second referendum, in a people's vote? That is how we resolve Brexit, not by proroguing and dissolving and dodging and obfuscating. Now, I want to make one more important point, which is about how the people of our country have been let down by successive governments. The status quo is intolerable for huge numbers of people in our country. Brexit laid bare the extent to which our governance structures are derelict. The social contract is broken, the power game is rigged. The 17.4 million people who gave the establishment such a well-deserved kicking in 2016 were right and reasonable to be furious. Because we need a powerful commitment now, not even to try to go back to the way things were before 2016. But that means tackling democratic failure as well as economic failure. It means redistributing power as well as wealth. So if the government were genuine about being on the side of the people, they'd be honest enough to own the complete chaos that they've managed to create. They would put country before party and back a citizens' convention to revitalise our democracy and explore proposals like a codified written constitution, a fairer voting system so that people's views are properly heard. Let's at last have a democracy that puts people at the heart of it. And they would also finally provide a categorical assurance that they will respect this House and the democracy that we do have and not seek to avoid it in any way and not try to avoid implementing the bill that we have just voted on tonight.
Mr. Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think every honourable and right honourable member in this House respects the passion and bravery of the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion, but will she at least recognise the irony that she's calling for the revitalisation of democracy at the same time as she's voting against renewing the representative mandate of this House? And I would just invite this House to consider, I'm going to be very brief, I would just invite this House, and the irony also extends to those crying for a people's vote who are now going to vote against the people having a vote about the future of this House. The British public have watched this House of Commons decline into an almost zombie parliament, a parliament that's incapable of deciding anything, and a parliament which is still dominated by Remain thinking and Remain attitudes, even though the British people clearly voted leave in the referendum. Yesterday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I spoke about the problem of us having created conflicting representative and direct mandates. That the legitimacy of this House was unquestionably as a House of Representatives, but we qualified that as we introduced the concept of referendums into our Constitution, and the representative mandate is unalterably qualified by the fact that we've had a referendum and we said we would implement the result of that referendum, and this House has failed to do so. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how is this going to be resolved? It's not going to be resolved by continuing to put off decisions. And yet the bill, which so many of the Remain supporting members of this House are so pleased with, does no more than invite the European Union to put off the decisions. What is going to be gained by putting off the decisions again? And what is going to be, and what kind of respect will this House gain by putting off the decisions at the same time as avoiding the accountability that a general election would give to our electors to make us accountable for what we are responsible for? I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Does my honourable friend share my puzzlement that opposition benches are looking at a government that has lost its majority, that cannot get its business through, that is offering the chance of a general election, which will be about more than just Brexit? There are other things that matter to my constituents, and that they will still want to renew a mandate and give a government a mandate to deliver on those things. And that with a government without the ability to deliver needs to have a general election. And I would have thought anybody opposite would have said that.
I share agreement with much of what my honourable friend says. But then I return to this question: how is it going to be resolved? Because when supposing the opposition is successful and the bill goes through, and the Prime Minister is obliged to go and seek an extension and to accept an extension, and we get an extension to, say, the 31st of January or whatever date the European Union decides to offer. I'm not going to give way. What will happen after that? I mean, there is a definition of madness, which is to repeat the same thing again and again and accept a different outcome. And the longer this goes on, the more members of Parliament in this House will fear holding a general election, because out there, then the faith in the established political parties, I'm not going to give away this, the voters' faith in the establishment political parties is not being improved by what's going on, it's being further undermined. And the last thing I wanted was the whole of British politics to be realigned around the question of Brexit. But that's what's going to happen the longer we carry on putting off this decision. And I long, like so many of my voters and so many colleagues in this House, to move on to the questions beyond Brexit, but that requires us to respect the decision that has been taken. And it requires respecting the fact that there's a government in office with the responsibility to conduct the negotiations as it sees fit, or it requires those who do not have confidence in that government to put down a motion of confidence and resolve that question. And this brings me again, Mr. Speaker, back to the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which is what the resolution that we are debating this evening arises from the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And this has been turned out to be a recipe for this paralysis. This paralysis would never have arisen but for the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act. I beg your pardon, I hear the honourable gentleman from the north-east of England, I forget his constituents, North Durham, saying, well, you voted for it, he says, accusingly at me. I certainly did not vote for it. And I remember, and I put on record in this House, I remember walking through the No lobby with remarkably few people against the second reading of that vote, and that bill, and I said to them, don't worry, this House will rue the day that it passed this piece of legislation, and we should now be rueing the day, because that piece of legislation has put this House in the position where it can endlessly wound a government but can avoid killing it. And we now have, if the Leader of the Opposition has so much contempt for the way this government is conducting its affairs, and this government no longer has a majority, why don't they put down a motion of confidence? It's because there is fear in this House about facing the consequences of a general election because of the way this House has conducted the whole Brexit affair for the last 3 years.
Yep, that's right.
And when I ask how is this going to be resolved, I can tell you this. Putting it off again and again isn't going to make the political outcome of the eventual general election any easier for a great many colleagues in this House. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in his inimitable style, is showing leadership and courage at last. He is trying to resolve this issue. Leave and remain were the words on the ballot paper. There wasn't any reference to a deal or no deal. And there was no reference to a deal or no deal, but the Prime Minister of the day made it quite clear that we would leave the European Union, and this House has conspired again and again to delay that happening. People in their constituencies, people particularly in Remain voting constituencies, should ask themselves what mandate do they have for putting off this decision again and again. And it's democracy in our country that is paying the price, and it's the rise of far more extremist parties that will be the result if this House carries on putting off the decision.
Thelma Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm relatively new to this place, but when I was elected as Member of Parliament for Colne Valley, one of the few things I had to get used to was being addressed as Honourable Lady, and when addressing male colleagues as Honourable Gentleman. It seemed strange and really arcane. Yet recently I've been considering what it means to be honourable and realise that it's indeed appropriate to consider what makes a person truly honourable. And it's a pity the Prime Minister is not in his place. Would the Prime Minister be able to confirm that the people of this country consider the government's recent behaviour to be honourable? It's clear many people outside Westminster think not. Furthermore, I've been reflecting on my years as a teacher and head teacher and considering how hard I worked, as do all teaching professionals, to instil the right values and ethos throughout a school, such as respect, honesty and integrity, I'll make progress. Integrity, I used to explain to younger children, was doing the right thing even when someone isn't watching. Well, we're watching the Prime Minister. And I fear if there's an attempt to get away with no deal, with no mandate, and trying to gag Parliament whilst we're watching, what other horrors are going on behind closed doors? Could the Prime Minister tell me if he believes his Cabinet has the integrity required to run our country, especially when some are lying flat out along the front bench? I remember some time back being invited to a meeting with one of the government ministers to discuss a local constituency matter. He said, the chamber is just theatre and the real work goes on in meetings like this. That stayed with me, Mr. Speaker. It really did. As I know that this place is not theatre to me, and when I speak, it's from the heart. And I speak for my people in Colne Valley and those that are suffering under this government's cruel and callous austerity. Yes, I want a general election so that we have a government which acts with both honour and integrity and respects the business in this chamber. However, I want that election on the opposition's terms and when there's no possible chance of a no-deal Brexit. The history books will show that this current government acted with neither honour nor integrity and made us the laughingstock of the world. Our country deserves far better.
John Barron.
Speaker, I stand briefly to raise one simple point, and it's an inconvenient truth for many in this chamber, and that is the overwhelming majority of members here tonight voted to trigger Article 50. And what Article 50 said, very simply, is that we would leave the EU by the 29th of March with or without a deal. And yet we have now seen 2 extensions to that deadline. And to many outside this place, it is evident proof that there are too many Remain MPs in this place who will clasp onto any straw that is passing in order to delay and frustrate the EU referendum result. And that is wrong. It is very wrong indeed. Not only does it make for a lack of trust, but actually it's reinforcing a scepticism in our politics, Mr. Speaker, which is not healthy at all. And we've had straws, I will in a minute, but I'll just finish this point. We've had straws in the wind clasped such as the people need another vote. Or we need to support this ridiculous motion, which quite literally anybody who has negotiated will understand. If you signal to this other side of the table you're not prepared to walk away, it makes for a worse deal. That is a fact. But not to many members here who will clasp at any straw to try and frustrate Brexit. And I'll give you one other example, Mr. Speaker, of how Brexit is being frustrated in this place, because there is a near hysteria about no deal, despite the fact that actually the UK, we trade with the majority of the world's GDP, many countries outside the EU on no-deal WTO terms. 5 of the EU's own top 10 trading partners trade on the basis of WTO no deal. And since Project Fear in 2016 failed, what we've had since is record low unemployment, record manufacturing output, and record investment and record investment. In fact, last year we had more inward investment than France and Germany put together, all in the full knowledge that we could be leaving on no-deal WTO terms. Now, despite all that, we've had members in this place who have clasped, too many Remain MPs who've clasped at these straws in order to frustrate Brexit and disregard the EU referendum result. That must now end. People have lost their patience with this place. The time has come, actually, to put actions instead of words. And I will give way to the honourable gentleman over there who stood first.
Well, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. My simple point was this. I voted to trigger Article 50, but the then Prime Minister called a general election where I set down red lines to my constituents about what kind of deal I would get and vote for. And the Prime Minister lost that election effectively by losing 40-odd seats. So the honourable gentleman, my mandate comes from the 2017 election.
Actually, that's not a very fair point, for the very simple reason that both the Labour manifesto in that general election and the Conservative manifesto promised to deliver Brexit. And all we've seen since is utter delay and confusion, caused largely by Remain MPs who will not honour that referendum result. So at the end of the day, at the end of... Oh, go on, I will give way, go on.
The honourable gentleman keeps saying that this is a Remain Parliament with Remain MPs. He keeps throwing that around, but the House of Commons Library confirmed that in excess of 575 MPs in this House have voted for Brexit and voted for leave. How does he say that they are Remain MPs when they are voting to leave the European Union?
For a very simple reason, because the House has consistently voted not to honour the triggering of Article 50. We've kept kicking it into the long grass. When he voted, and I voted, to trigger Article 50, it was a very simple, short bill. It said we will leave by the 29th of March with or without a deal. Now, you've had your chance. You've had your chance. With or without a deal. But what have too many members done in this place is continue to kick the can down the road, not once, not twice, but now 3 times, courtesy of this bill, or the bill preceding the business tonight. It is absolutely ridiculous. People are utterly fed up with it. I think a lot of Remain MPs have got to look themselves in the mirror and say, actually, all I want to do, own up to the fact that all they want to do is stop Brexit. The people out there have had enough.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am absolutely desperate to have a general election. I want to see a government which actually halts the privatisation of the National Health Service, which properly funds our public services, which stops the wealth of this country being squirreled away in tax havens in the Caribbean. I want to see a government that cares about the majority of the people in this country and not just about the very wealthy. But that is not why the Prime Minister is calling for a general election. The Prime Minister is not calling for a general election so that we can have a Labour government. The Prime Minister is calling for a general election so that when and if we were to vote for it, he would be in sole control of what happened in this country, and there would be no Parliament here to hold him to account when we leave with a no-deal Brexit. Now, in my constituency of Ipswich, more than 50% of the voters who voted in the referendum voted to leave. It wasn't very much more than 50%, but it was more than 50%. I would not vote for a straight vote to revoke Article 50 because I think that would be wrong. After there has been a referendum and people have voted, albeit by a narrow margin, to leave the European Union. I think it would be entirely wrong for this House to then simply go against those wishes. I want to see a viable deal that would not destroy the economy of this country being agreed by this Parliament, so that when we have a second vote, when we have a people's vote or a second referendum or whatever you want to call it, which I think we have to have if we're going to bring the country back together again, I want there to be a viable choice. I do not believe that a no-deal Brexit is a viable choice. I think a no-deal Brexit is a suicide note. And if anybody on the opposite benches thinks that as passengers in a speeding car, speeding towards a cliff edge, we are going to take the option of jumping out just before you reach the cliff edge, then you've got another thing coming. Yes, we will have a general election. You will not survive for very much longer because you do not have an overall majority. But we are not going to have that general election while there is the danger of a no-deal Brexit.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say I find this a surreal debate in a zombie parliament. I've tried pinching myself to make sure that I'm awake. I was talking to the Honourable Member for Harlow and I said, this isn't a dream, and he assured me it isn't. And I have one of my colleagues saying now, Bob, please make it go away. All I can say is, for people who are organising a coup, people who organise a coup generally don't put that coup to the people in the form of a vote. We want a people's vote. It's called a general election. The government is trying to get its agenda through. Because of the nature of this Parliament, it is not succeeding. Therefore, we need an election to ask the people what they are for, rather than simply their representatives to endlessly vote what they are against. I want an election because I want a government that delivers Brexit and then frankly gets on and governs. The Scottish Islands have the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance. I want something similar for my Isle of Wight. I was talking about it to the Prime Minister in the tea room today. He's keen to give it to us. I want it to cover the NHS, an extra 10 million in revenue. I want it to cover local government. I want it to cover DEFRA and housing. We can't get that because for 6 months we haven't had a domestic agenda because we have become monomaniacally obsessed by Brexit. I don't know what the parties opposite want, Mr. Speaker. 3 times they have been offered a Brexit deal. 3 times they have refused. Tonight they are being offered a general election, and tonight they are refusing. They cling to a zombie parliament for fear of what will happen when they go to the people. We need a new parliament, Mr. Speaker, because we need a government with a mandate and a parliament that votes for something positive. From now on, a collection of opposition MPs should be known, frankly, Mr. Speaker, as a shambles, because we offer leadership. What they offer, God knows. Thank you.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister has put to us is clearly a poison chalice. He is like the schoolroom clown who thinks that he can offer something to us, dancing around, blabbering from the dispatch box, but we know who he is. He is a man who has been twice sacked for lying. He clearly is a person that we cannot trust, and we therefore...
Order. The Honourable Gentleman is referring to parts of a member's career. I don't think he's making any allegation on us. Sincerely hope he isn't about... if you'll let me finish. I hope he isn't making any allegation about the conduct of a member in this chamber, and he isn't. and therefore he is not out of order, but he's not out of order. I know the rules, and I know how to interpret them. I don't require any guidance from anybody on that matter. I'm very clear about that. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is there is much to be said for moderation in the use of parliamentary language, and as somebody who likes the honourable gentleman, I would urge him to be a little more courteous. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
I will correct myself and say he was allegedly sacked for lying twice, and the public...
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Tom Brake and Jonathan Edwards.
Pause.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56. So the ayes have it, but the House will be aware that the motion has not obtained the majority required under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011. Unlock. Yes, oh, very good. Well done. Yes, yes, indeed. Point of order, the Prime Minister. We're grateful.
Thank you very much for your kindness. I note that the Leader of the Opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election, Mr. Speaker. I can only speculate. I can only speculate as to the reasons behind his hesitation, Mr. Speaker. The obvious conclusion is, I'm afraid, that he does not think he will win. And I urge his colleagues to reflect on what I think is the unsustainability of this position overnight and in the course of the next few days.
Thank you. Would the clerk will now proceed to read very well. Point of order, Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Speaker, is there some way of tabling a motion that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's opposition?
Well, I'm dealing with one point at a time. One has to proceed in an orderly manner in these matters. I say to the Prime Minister, I'm dealing with one point of order, and when I've dealt with it, I shall happily attend to another. It is evident from the smile on the face of the honourable gentleman that he is very pleased with the point that he has made. Point of order, Mr. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I was just going to elaborate by saying this is the first time in history that the opposition has voted to show confidence in Her Majesty's government.
Thank you. Thank you. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Animal Welfare Sentencing Bill not amended in the Public Bill Committee to be considered.